You know what's absolutely wild? Buried in clay jars for over 2,000 years, hidden in caves near the Dead Sea, were ancient manuscripts that completely change what we thought we knew about fasting. And here's the kicker: modern medicine has basically ignored what these scrolls reveal about this ancient practice. So today, we're diving deep into what the Dead Sea Scrolls actually say about fasting, and why this information could change your entire perspective on health. But before we get into this mind-blowing stuff, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you're going to want to follow along for what comes next, because this isn't your typical health advice. This is ancient wisdom that's been validated by modern science but somehow never made it into your doctor's office. Alright, let's start with the basics. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered between 1947 and 1956 in 11 caves along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea. These weren't just random old papers. These were the oldest known manuscripts of biblical texts and sectarian documents from a Jewish community that lived around 2,000 years ago. Among these texts were detailed instructions about daily living, spiritual practices, and yes, fasting protocols that were way more sophisticated than we ever imagined. Now here's what makes this absolutely fascinating. This ancient community, likely the Essenes, didn't view fasting the way we do today. We think of fasting as just not eating for weight loss or maybe some vague detox idea. But the scrolls reveal something much deeper. They describe fasting as a precise practice tied to lunar cycles, seasonal changes, and specific purification rituals. They had a calendar system that dictated when and how to fast, and it wasn't arbitrary. It was based on observations of nature and the human body's rhythms. The community rule, one of the major scrolls found, describes periods of abstinence that align with what we now call circadian biology. These ancient practitioners understood something that modern chronobiology is only now confirming: that when you eat matters just as much as what you eat. They fasted during specific times of the day and month, creating patterns that modern research shows optimize cellular repair and metabolic function. But your doctor probably never connected these dots for you, because Western medicine has largely separated ancient wisdom from clinical practice. Here's where it gets really interesting. The scrolls describe different types of fasting with different purposes. There was fasting for spiritual purification, sure, but there was also fasting specifically described for physical healing, and what they called cleansing the temple of the body. The Damascus document and the Temple Scroll both reference practices that sound remarkably similar to what we now know as autophagy, the cellular cleaning process that won the Nobel Prize in 2016. These ancient people somehow knew that periodic food restriction triggered the body's self-cleaning mechanisms. And get this, the scrolls mention fasting in combination with specific water rituals. The community practiced ritual immersion, which wasn't just symbolic. When combined with their fasting protocols, they were essentially doing what modern biohackers call contrast therapy and hydration optimization during fasted states. They would fast, then immerse in cold water, understanding that this combination amplified the benefits. Science now confirms that cold exposure during fasting increases norepinephrine and activates brown fat, but they figured this out 2 millennia ago without labs or peer-reviewed studies. Now let's talk about something doctors definitely don't tell you. The scrolls reveal that this ancient community fasted communally and had specific support structures for it. Fasting wasn't a solo diet attempt destined to fail. It was integrated into their entire way of life with community accountability. Modern research on behavioral change shows that social support is one of the strongest predictors of success in any health intervention, but we've turned fasting into this isolated, individualistic challenge. The Essenes knew better. They fasted together, broke fasts together, and created rhythms that made it sustainable rather than a crash diet. Another bombshell from the scrolls: they had different fasting protocols for different seasons. The calendar texts show that longer fasts were prescribed during specific times of the year, while other periods called for modified eating windows. This isn't random. We now know that human metabolism changes with seasons, that our insulin sensitivity varies throughout the year, and that vitamin D levels affect how our bodies respond to fasting. These ancient practitioners had empirically discovered what endocrinologists are only recently documenting in metabolic research. What's really profound is how the scrolls connect fasting to mental clarity and what they called receiving wisdom. Multiple texts describe fasting as preparation for deeper understanding and insight. Neuroscience now shows us why. When you fast, your brain shifts to using ketones for fuel, which many researchers believe provides more stable energy than glucose and may enhance cognitive function. The brain-derived neurotrophic factor increases during fasting, literally growing new brain cells. The Essenes described experiencing heightened awareness during fasts, and they weren't imagining it. They were experiencing real neurochemical changes that modern medicine has only recently measured. But here's what might be the most important revelation from these ancient texts. Fasting was never extreme or punishing in their practice. The scrolls describe measured, regular periods of food restriction integrated into a balanced lifestyle. They ate nutrient-dense foods when they did eat, emphasized whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and limited animal products. Their fasting wasn't about deprivation or suffering. It was about creating rhythm and balance. Compare that to how fasting is often portrayed today as either an extreme biohacking experiment or a crash diet for rapid weight loss. We've lost the nuance that these ancient people understood instinctively. The medical texts found among the scrolls, though fragmented, reference fasting as treatment for various ailments. While we can't read complete protocols, the fragments suggest they used fasting therapeutically for digestive issues, inflammatory conditions, and what sounds like metabolic disorders. Fast forward to today and we have clinical trials showing fasting helps with insulin resistance, reduces inflammation, improves gut health, and may even slow aging. But how many doctors actually prescribe fasting as a first-line treatment? Very few, because our medical system is built on pharmaceutical interventions, not lifestyle modifications that people could do for free. Let's dig into the spiritual and physical connection that the scrolls emphasize. For the Essenes, there was no separation between spiritual practice and physical health. Fasting was simultaneously a physical reset and a spiritual discipline. Modern medicine has completely divorced these concepts, treating the body as a machine separate from consciousness or meaning. But research in psychoneuroimmunology shows that mental states directly affect immune function, that stress impacts every system in your body, and that practices that combine physical and mental discipline produce better health outcomes than either alone. The scrolls understood what we're only now relearning: you can't separate mind and body. Here's something that'll blow your mind. The scrolls describe preparation and refeeding protocols. They didn't just stop eating abruptly or break fasts with whatever was available. There were specific instructions about how to enter and exit fasting periods. They understood that the transition matters as much as the fast itself. Modern fasting research confirms this. How you break a fast determines much of the benefit you get from it. Jumping straight back to heavy processed foods can cause digestive distress and metabolic spikes that negate much of what you gained. But most fasting advice today focuses only on the restriction period, ignoring what these ancient practitioners knew was crucial. The purity laws described in the scrolls weren't just religious rules. They were sophisticated food quality standards combined with timing protocols. The community avoided certain foods entirely and restricted others to specific times. They were essentially practicing what we now call clean eating and time-restricted feeding. They understood that food quality and timing work synergistically. You can fast perfectly, but if you break your fast with inflammatory junk food, you're missing the point. Similarly, eating the cleanest diet but grazing constantly keeps you in a fed state that prevents many of fasting's benefits. The scrolls show these ancient people had figured out both variables mattered. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Why has modern medicine largely ignored these insights? Part of it is institutional. Medical education focuses on treating disease with interventions, drugs, procedures, surgeries. Lifestyle modifications like fasting don't fit neatly into billable services. There's also a bias against ancient wisdom in favor of modern clinical trials, even when those trials often confirm what traditional practices have known for centuries. The Dead Sea Scrolls represent a 2,000-year-old clinical practice log, but because it's framed in religious and spiritual language rather than scientific terminology, it gets dismissed or relegated to archaeology rather than medicine. Here's what the scrolls reveal about individualization that's crucial. While they had communal practices, there were also variations for different people based on their roles, ages, and conditions. Not everyone fasted identically. This is something modern fasting culture often gets wrong. There's a one-size-fits-all mentality where everyone's supposed to do 18/6 or alternate day fasting or whatever's trending. But human metabolism varies, hormones differ, life circumstances differ. The ancient practitioners understood that the framework could be consistent while the application needed personalization. That's actually more sophisticated than most modern diet advice. The War Scroll and other texts describe how fasting was used to prepare warriors before battle. This wasn't about weight cutting like modern fighters do, which often destroys performance. This was about achieving metabolic flexibility and mental sharpness. There's fascinating military research now about fasting improving stress resilience and cognitive performance under pressure. Special operations communities have started exploring fasting protocols for exactly the reasons described in these ancient texts: sharper focus, better stress response, enhanced physical readiness. The Essenes were optimizing human performance through fasting 2,000 years before Navy SEALs existed. Let's talk about what the scrolls say regarding women and fasting, because this is important and often ignored. While the Dead Sea community was predominantly male, cross-references with other historical texts from the period show women had modified fasting practices, particularly around menstruation and childbearing. This recognition that female physiology requires different approaches is something modern fasting advice often misses. Women's hormonal cycles mean that fasting protocols that work great for men can backfire for women if applied identically. The ancient understanding was more nuanced than our current Instagram fasting culture that treats everyone the same. Another critical point from the scrolls: fasting was never the only practice. It was part of an integrated lifestyle that included physical labor, time in nature, community connection, spiritual practice, and whole food nutrition. Ripping fasting out of that context and trying to apply it while maintaining a stressful modern lifestyle with processed foods, artificial light, and social isolation won't give you the same results. The Essenes' health wasn't just from fasting. It was from a complete way of living where fasting was one element in a holistic system. We want the magic bullet, but the scrolls reveal there isn't one. It's the synergy of multiple practices. The Thanksgiving hymns found among the scrolls describe transformative experiences associated with fasting periods. People reported profound gratitude, emotional release, and what we might now call breakthrough experiences. There's emerging research on fasting's effects on emotional regulation and even trauma processing. When the body isn't spending energy on digestion, when ketones are fueling the brain, when autophagy is clearing cellular debris, something shifts emotionally and psychologically too. The ancients recognized fasting as a tool for emotional and spiritual transformation, not just physical health. Modern medicine is only beginning to explore fasting's psychiatric and psychological applications. Here's a practical takeaway from the scrolls that you can use today. They emphasized gradual adoption. New members of the community didn't immediately jump into the full fasting protocols. There was a period of acclimation, of building capacity. This is exactly what modern research on habit formation and metabolic adaptation tells us works best. If you've never fasted before, starting with 24-hour water fasts is probably going to fail and feel miserable. But gradually extending your overnight fast, building metabolic flexibility, allowing your body to adapt, that's sustainable. The scrolls show a sophisticated understanding of human behavior change that our quick-fix culture has forgotten. The concept of fasting as rest for the digestive system appears repeatedly in the scrolls. They understood that constant eating was labor for the body. Modern research on the migrating motor complex, the gut's cleaning system that only activates when you're not eating, confirms this ancient insight. Your digestive system needs breaks to repair, clean, and reset. Eating constantly, even healthy foods, prevents this maintenance from happening. The Essenes gave their bodies regular rest periods and their health reflected it. We've normalized constant eating as 3 meals plus snacks, but that's historically and biologically abnormal. What about the length of fasts described in the scrolls? They varied from daily eating windows that sound like 16-8 time restricted feeding, to longer periodic fasts that could last several days during specific observances. This variety is important. Different fasting durations trigger different biological processes. Short daily fasts optimize circadian rhythms and metabolic flexibility. Longer periodic fasts trigger deeper autophagy and immune system reset. The scrolls suggest both were valuable and served different purposes. Modern research is confirming that fasting benefits aren't linear. Longer isn't always better, and variety might be more beneficial than rigidity. Here's something doctors definitely don't tell you. The scrolls indicate fasting was considered preventive, not just therapeutic. It wasn't something you did only when sick. It was regular maintenance that prevented illness. This is a fundamental shift from how modern medicine operates. We wait until disease develops, then treat it. The Essene approach was to maintain health through regular practices, including fasting. We now have research showing fasting reduces cancer risk, prevents neurodegenerative disease, and extends health span. But how often is it prescribed preventively? Almost never. The scrolls reveal a healthcare paradigm focused on maintenance rather than crisis management. The integration of fasting with prayer and meditation in the scrolls isn't just spiritual fluff. There's actual biology here. Fasting increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor and ketone production, which enhance neuroplasticity. Meditation and contemplative practices also change brain structure and function. Combining them creates synergistic effects. The Essenes weren't just fasting. They were fasting while engaging in practices that maximized the neurological benefits. Modern biohackers are rediscovering this combination, but it was standard practice 2 millennia ago. Your doctor won't mention it because it doesn't fit into a prescription pad. So what can we actually learn from all this? The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal that ancient practitioners had a sophisticated, nuanced, integrated approach to fasting that modern medicine has largely ignored. They understood circadian rhythms, seasonal variations, individual differences, the importance of food quality and timing, the mental and spiritual dimensions of the practice, and how to implement it sustainably within community. They used fasting preventively and therapeutically with protocols for entering and exiting fasts, with variations for different people and purposes. Modern science is now validating virtually everything these ancient texts described, from autophagy to metabolic flexibility to cognitive enhancement. Yet this knowledge rarely makes it from research journals into doctors' offices and certainly not into mainstream health advice. We've got 2,000-year-old manuscripts describing practices that could address many of our modern health crises: obesity, diabetes, inflammation, cognitive decline, and we're largely ignoring them in favor of pharmaceutical approaches that treat symptoms rather than addressing root causes. The invitation here isn't to romanticize ancient practices or reject modern medicine. It's to recognize that maybe, just maybe, people who live closer to natural rhythms and observed the effects of their practices over generations had figured out some things we've forgotten in our rush toward technological solutions. The Dead Sea Scrolls are like a time capsule of empirical health data, and the message is clear: fasting done wisely as part of an integrated lifestyle is one of the most powerful tools humans have for optimizing health. Your doctor probably won't mention any of this because medical education doesn't include ancient manuscripts in the curriculum, because there's no profit in telling people to occasionally not eat, because our entire healthcare system is built around intervention rather than prevention. But now you know. You know that fasting isn't a modern diet trend. It's an ancient practice refined over millennia with benefits that modern science is only now beginning to fully understand. The real question is, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to keep waiting for permission from authorities who may never give it? Or are you going to explore these practices yourself, carefully and intelligently, and see what these ancient people understood about the human body? The scrolls have been translated. The research is available. The choice is yours. And if you're thinking about exploring fasting yourself, remember what the scrolls teach us about doing it wisely. Start small, don't jump into extreme protocols. Build your practice gradually, just like the ancient community did with new members. Give your body time to adapt, to become metabolically flexible, to recognize that fasting is a normal part of your biological rhythm, not a punishment or a crisis state. Your ancestors fasted regularly. Your body knows how to do this. You're not experimenting with something foreign, you're returning to something natural. Pay attention to how your body responds. Not everyone will feel amazing on day one of fasting. Some people experience headaches or fatigue as their bodies transition from glucose to ketones. That's normal, that's adaptation. The scrolls understood this. They had support systems in place because they knew the transition could be challenging. If you're exploring this alone, be patient with yourself. Drink water, stay hydrated, maybe add some salt or electrolytes if you're struggling. The ancient texts didn't have electrolyte supplements, but they understood the importance of hydration and mineral balance during fasts. Consider the seasonality aspect that the scrolls emphasize. Maybe longer fasts make sense in winter when your body is naturally more introspective and you're not as active outdoors. Maybe in summer you focus on shorter daily fasting windows that keep you energized and present. This isn't rigidity. This is wisdom. It's working with your body's natural patterns rather than fighting them. A year from now, you might notice that fasting feels easier in some seasons than others, and that's not failure. That's you becoming attuned to your own biology. And please don't fall into the trap of fasting on a diet of processed foods. That defeats the entire purpose. The scrolls were adamant about food quality. They ate whole foods, nutrient-dense foods, foods with actual nutritional content. If you're going to fast, make your eating windows count. When you do eat things that nourish you. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, high-quality proteins, healthy fats. This isn't about restriction. It's about choosing foods that actually support your body rather than deplete it. The combination of clean eating and strategic fasting is what creates transformation. Neither alone is as powerful. Think about your community too. The scrolls repeatedly emphasize that this practice wasn't done in isolation. Is there someone in your life who might be interested in exploring fasting together? A friend, a family member, a partner? Having someone to discuss your experience with, to share observations with, to encourage you when it gets hard changes everything. You don't need to join some formal program. You just need one person who gets it. Modern life is isolating enough. Ancient wisdom involved connection and shared practice for good reason. Consider keeping some simple notes about your experience. Not obsessive tracking, not obsessing over metrics, just basic observations. How do you feel? How's your energy, your mood, your sleep, your digestion? The Essenes practiced careful observation and transmitted their knowledge through written records. We have those scrolls now because they documented what they learned. Your observations might surprise you. You might notice patterns you never would have seen otherwise. You might discover that fasting on certain days works better for you than others. That's valuable personal data that no generic protocol can give you. As you move forward, remember that fasting is a tool, not a religion. It's not something you have to do perfectly or never miss or follow exactly as prescribed. The scrolls describe flexibility and individualization. Some days you might fast, some days circumstances make that impossible. Some weeks you might practice daily shortened eating windows, other weeks longer fasts. Life happens, the goal isn't perfection. The goal is integrating this ancient practice into your life in a way that feels sustainable and beneficial. Be especially careful about not developing an unhealthy relationship with fasting. If you find yourself obsessing about it, if you're using it as punishment for eating, if you're extending fasts beyond what feels good just to prove something, that's not what the scrolls teach. That's not ancient wisdom. That's modern diet culture wearing ancient clothing. Real fasting should feel like freedom eventually. It should feel like honoring your body's natural rhythms. If it feels like punishment or control, something's off. The scrolls also remind us that fasting works best within a complete lifestyle context. You can't expect fasting to fix everything if the rest of your life is chaotic. Sleep matters, stress management matters, movement matters, community matters, clean air and water matter. These aren't separate from fasting, they're part of the same ecosystem. Maybe you start with fasting and that becomes your entry point to cleaning up other areas. That's how it often works. One practice creates momentum for other changes. You fast for a few weeks, you feel better, that motivates you to sleep better, and suddenly you're living the integrated lifestyle that produces real transformation. What about social pressure or family dinners or work situations where fasting might be awkward? The ancient community probably faced similar challenges. Different seasons, different work demands, different social obligations. They built flexibility into their practice. If you're fasting and you're invited to a meaningful meal with people you love, eat the meal. Enjoy it. Don't turn fasting into isolation or rigidity. The goal is health and connection, not proving you can stick to a protocol no matter what. The scrolls understood that spiritual practices serve life, not the reverse. There's also real wisdom in understanding that fasting isn't appropriate for everyone in every circumstance. If you're pregnant or nursing, fasting protocols need to be different. If you have a history of disordered eating, fasting might trigger unhealthy patterns and should be approached carefully with professional support. If you're on certain medications, fasting might interact negatively. If you have specific medical conditions, your doctor's guidance matters. The scrolls recognized that the application varied. They weren't describing universal protocols that everyone followed identically. The framework could be adapted. That's actually more sophisticated than treating fasting as a one-size-fits-all practice. The beautiful thing is that you don't need to be perfect to benefit. You don't need to understand all the biochemistry or the history or the spiritual context. You just need to try it and pay attention. The scrolls teach us through example that ordinary people over many generations discovered something powerful through simple experimentation and observation. You can do the same. You don't need special certification or credentials. You just need your own body and your own willingness to pay attention. Think about this: 2,000 years ago, people figured out that periodic fasting created profound benefits without technology, without peer-reviewed studies, without any of the infrastructure of modern science. They did it through observation and experience. Then that knowledge got lost or marginalized for centuries. Now we're rediscovering it through expensive research confirming what was already known. Isn't that fascinating and slightly embarrassing for modern medicine? The ancients had something figured out, we forgot it. Now we're slowly remembering. But here's the crucial thing: knowing about ancient fasting practices changes nothing unless you actually implement them. Reading about the scrolls is interesting. Fasting is transformative. There's a difference between intellectual understanding and experiential knowledge. You can read everything ever written about fasting, understand all the mechanisms, know all the research, and still not experience the benefits if you don't actually practice it. The scrolls aren't just literature. They're instructions for living. They only work if you use them. So here's my actual challenge to you beyond just watching this video. In the next week, try a simple fast, not something extreme. Maybe just extend your overnight fast by a few hours. Eat dinner at 7, don't eat breakfast until noon instead of 8, that's it. 16 hours, see how you feel, journal about it if you want, pay attention, that's all. 1 week, one simple fast, actual experience. Then you can decide if you want to explore further. That's how the ancient community did it. Not through intellectual debate, but through actual practice and observation. Because ultimately, the message from the Dead Sea Scrolls is that your body has ancient wisdom built into it. Your cells know how to repair themselves when given the chance. Your metabolism knows how to shift between fed and fasted states. Your mind knows how to achieve clarity and focus. These aren't modern discoveries. These are rediscoveries of things humans have known and practiced for millennia. The scrolls are just writ evidence that we're not inventing something new. We're remembering something ancient. The invitation stands. You have the information. You know what the ancient texts reveal. You understand that modern science is validating these practices. You see that this could address real health challenges in your own life. The only question remaining is whether you're going to engage with it or file it away as interesting historical trivia and continue doing what you've always done. The scrolls have been waiting 2,000 years for this moment, for people who could actually benefit from their wisdom to find them. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration of what the Dead Sea Scrolls actually teach about fasting. If this perspective shifted something for you, if you're feeling curious about trying these ancient practices, if you think someone else needs to hear this, please share this video. Help spread this information. The institutions that should be teaching this aren't. We have to do it ourselves. We have to pass along what we're learning. And please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. This channel is dedicated to bringing you information that bridges ancient wisdom and modern science, things that matter for your actual health and life but don't fit neatly into mainstream narratives. Every video we put out, we're trying to uncover what's been hidden or forgotten or marginalized. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because trust me, there's more ancient wisdom waiting to be rediscovered and more questions to be answered about how our ancestors optimized their health and lives. Thank you again. I'm genuinely grateful you're here, that you're curious, that you're willing to question and explore. That's exactly the energy we need more of. Now go live what you've learned. Start small. Pay attention. Trust your own body's wisdom. The scrolls knew, your body knows, you've got everything you need.